This module is a brief discussion on the legal characters that you can use in a file name and the concept of a file type. We'll start with file name characters. Now, the following characters are perfectly acceptable to be used in Unix file names. Any alphanumeric character, the full stop or period or dot, a comma, the @ sign, minus sign, or which is also known as a dash, underscore, plus sign, equals sign, or a colon. Those are all perfectly legal characters to use in file names that will not give you any trouble whatsoever. Now, there is another set of characters that it is actually legal to use in file names, but which you should try and avoid using. If you do use these characters in a file name or a directory name, it's going to give you a bit of a headache later on when you try and manipulate those files. The characters are all of those. Notice that you can use a space as part of your file name, but it is strongly recommended that you don't. It's not quite as friendly as Microsoft Windows in that regard. So basically you can't use quotes, you can't use any types of brackets, you can't use a semicolon, $, backslash, and so on. Or rather, you can use them, but as I said, you're going to give yourself a bit of a headache if you try to. It's possible, it's just awkward. Finally, there is one character that it is simply not possible to use in a file name. It doesn't matter how hard you try. And that character is, can you guess? Does anybody know what character is missing from there? You might want to pause the video before I show you the answer and see if you can guess. And the answer is the /. You can't use the / as a file name. Let me show you why not. The mv command is used to rename files. Let's do a little ls and find out. There's a file called bin file. I'll rename bin file using mv to bin file 1. Now that worked fine. Now I'll try and rename bin file 1 to bin/file 1. See what I'm trying to do? I'm trying to put a slash in the file name and cannot create the regular file. You simply can't do it. The reason for that is that the / is the character that we use to separate one path or one directory name from another in a path, if you recall that from our previous discussion. So what MV thinks it's trying to do here is it's trying to rename the bin file 1 file to a file called file1 in the bin directory, and we don't have a bin directory, so it can't be done. If we did happen to have a bin directory, the mv command would have succeeded, but not in the way expected. It actually would have moved the bin file 1 file into the bin directory and called it file1 in there. It certainly would have not ended up being called bin/file1. Confused? Well, don't worry about it too much. On the topic of file types, Unix doesn't really have a concept of a file type. Well, it does, but not in the sense that Windows does, and probably not in the sense that you're thinking of in your head. In other words, Windows, for example, has text documents and MP3 files and Word documents that end in a .doc extension and Excel spreadsheets that end in a .xls extension and so on. And Windows examines the three-letter extension to determine what type of file the file is. Unix does not have such a concept because Unix doesn't have any formal extensions. Because it doesn't have extensions, it doesn't have associations. Or at least it doesn't when we use a command line shell. What that means to us is that it's not possible to simply type in the name of a document, like fred.txt, and expect the file to be opened by the appropriate program. You've actually got to type the name of the program as well. Now, if you don't know what an association means, I wouldn't worry about it too much. Just remember that you can't just type in the name of a document and expect it to open. You must type in the name of a program. A bit more about the fact that we don't have any formal extension. Well, you can put an extension on any file that you like. You can simply call a file abc.123, or you can call a file fred.doc or jane.txt if you want to. But Unix doesn't do anything with that dot. It totally ignores the extension. The dot, and anything after it, is there for your benefit and your benefit alone. Some Unix programs will work more readily with a file if its name has a particular type of extension, but such extensions are not necessary, they're just recommended. And if you really want to try and find out what a file's actual type is, in other words what's in the file, there is a program called File which actually makes a guess about that. Let's have a look at File in action. So we type in File and we say, well, which file are we going to get it to look at? Well, I'll get it to look at every file in this directory. Just I'll put a little asterisk there. If you don't know what the asterisk is, don't worry, you'll learn that very shortly. And it will tell me the type, as best it can guess, of every file in the current directory. Like I said, it's a guess. It looks inside the file and reads some of the contents of the file, and if it can recognize those contents, it matches that against a little table of descriptions and shows you the description. So bin file and second bin file are ELF 32-bit LSB executable blah 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 blah. In other words, they're programs. And sample.html is an SGML document text, which is a rather complex way of saying it is an HTML web page document. Subdir1 is a directory, as we know, and user.list and another .txt are ASCII text. ASCII text is just another way of saying it's text that you could type in yourself on a keyboard. Now, that doesn't really give you the information that you need in the format that you'd probably like it, but that's all we have available. Anyway, that concludes the discussion on file types.